Hi there! I'm back today to share a quick video on a super easy coloring technique I use to make a background using Waffle Flower Stamp Set Sweets. I'm starting out with an A2 piece of vellum and I'm planning to stamp a bunch of the smaller images from this set to create a background. And an easy way for me to do this quickly is to take out a larger acrylic block and place the small images on it to my liking. Once I have all that laid out on the acrylic block, I'll go ahead and use my anti-static powder tool and stamp them onto the vellum using Versamark ink. And you'll notice that I'm stamping on my craft mat because I can actually see the stamping since it's on black. So you can sort of see the Versamark impressions versus if you put on white paper, it's really hard to see. You just want to make sure that once you're done to wipe down the craft mat well because you don't want the Versamark ink to be left on there. So when I finish stamping, I'll go ahead and add embossing powder. I'm using Hero Arts White. And I also have a little brush to help wipe off the powder in the places that it's sticking that I don't want it to. And I'll go ahead and heat set this very carefully. I don't like to put the heat gun on the vellum too long because it actually starts to crinkle if it's in one place for too long. I decided after that I wanted to add some pops of color, so I'm using the two different sized hearts in this set to stamp in Versamark ink, and I'm putting them in sort of the open spaces that are in the background. And then I'm using Stampendice's embossing powder in red tinsel to add the pops of color. And because this is a glitter embossing powder, it takes a little bit longer for me to see that it actually sets. So for this background, there's nothing really super complicated to the coloring. Once I have the background created, I'll just actually flip over the piece of vellum and use my alcohol markers to color it in. And I don't even stay within the lines of the heat embossing because I think for this look itself, having the outline of color around the image really makes it pop when you put it up against like white paper or a light colored cardstock. And you don't even need to blend out the colors at all. For most of these images, I'm only using one color per image. And for the big lollipop, it's the only image where I'm using two colors, and it was just for fun. I picked a green and an orange and I kind of added it wherever on the lollipop. So you want to use the back of the vellum because you don't want the marker tips to touch the heat embossed areas. So this technique for coloring is super fast and an easy way to create a colorful background with a stamp set that has a lot of smaller images. I'm using two of the larger images from this set for the main focal point of the card. So I'm stamping out the little girl and the candy jar. And I'm just using a Memento Tuxedo black ink on white cardstock. And I stamp it a few times because I really needed to re-ink my ink pad, but I just haven't gotten around to it. And for the jar of sweets, I'm using the set of sweets that fit perfectly within the jar. I'll color up these two images pretty quickly using the same color scheme I used for the background so everything kind of ties together. But I really love how happy the little girl looks, and why shouldn't she be? She's just surrounded by so much candy. I really appreciate the variety of sweets included in the set and that it fits perfectly inside the jar and you can use it with or without. The variety of the different candies makes it a really fun image to color. For all the colors that I'm using to color these two images and the background, I'll have them listed down below in the description bar. And also all the supplies that I'm using to create this card will be listed below as well. So once I finish coloring up the jar and the little girl, I decide on whether I want to use a white cardstock or maybe a kind of a creamy beigey color. And I decide on the beigey color because it still pops, but it adds a little bit more color than the stark white background. And so I'll actually trim down the vellum piece a 1/4 of an inch in total so that it's a little bit smaller than the A2 card base. I'll also go ahead and trim out a white strip, and this will be the focal point for the jar and the little girl. I just want it to stand out since the background is quite colorful and there's a lot going on. And I also want a place for the sentiment to be stamped as well. Once I figure out where I'm placing that white strip, I decide that I'm going to use the thank you sentiment from the stamp set, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp that in black. I think that the black outline that I used for the jar and the little girl matches the sentiment, so it looks fine and it goes well together. To adhere this vellum piece down to the card base, I'm using multimedia matte glue, and I'm placing it behind the little hearts mainly, and anywhere where there's a larger image that's a heat embossed. Because it's vellum, you can see the adhesive through the vellum, so I'm trying to hide it between these little spots. And it's easy to do as long as you have little pieces, and I'm using acrylic blocks to hold that down so I make sure it's glued. So for these two images, I'm just using score tape and I'm putting it everywhere behind the images. I decided that I wanted the main sentiment strip to be in the middle of the card, so I'm actually using my craft mat to kind of center everything and make sure it's correct. And once I decide on a position, I'll use my ATG tape runner to glue down that white strip. I'll flip it over and tape down the white strip as well. I'll release all the release paper on the score from the score tape on the images, and then I'll tape it directly onto the card. So more or less this card is complete. I just need to add it to an A2 top folding card base, and my card is done. Except I decided that I wanted to add a few more hearts, and it really ties together with the hearts that I used for the background. So I'll go ahead and use my anti-static powder tool and stamp these on Versamark ink, and I'll be using the same Stampendous embossing powder in red tinsel. And I realized that it was even harder to heat set this on paper, but I think it's just because it's a different embossing powder. It's a little bit more chunky because of the glitter. So I think that I'm just not used to it because I'm used to using really fine embossing powder where you can kind of see the transformation of when it heat sets. But I think that this really adds to it and ties it together with the background. And I think the card turned out pretty cute. I hope you enjoyed this card today and used the idea for stamp sets where you have really small images that are usually neglected. Coloring them up takes no time at all using this technique, and sometimes you just want to create a quick card. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.